My daughter-in-law shot my son, a look of pure venom as he hobbled into the courtroom. But it was the moment the judge laid eyes on me, standing right behind him, that the world seemed to stop. He froze, his gavel hovering in mid-air, and a single, disbelieving question escaped his lips. "Arthur, is that you? What on earth are you doing here?" A stunned silence fell over the entire room, a heavy blanket of confusion and shock. If you believe in the power of truth and family, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel to follow my journey. Less than an hour before that chilling question from the judge, the Chicago sky hung heavy and grey, a perfect mirror for the dread coiling in my stomach. I stood by our old sedan, my hand steady on my son Leo's back as I helped him navigate each painful step from the car. His movements were shaky, a tremor that came not just from the polished oak crutch bearing his weight, but from the cold, pitying stares of the small crowd that had gathered on the courthouse steps. The bells from a nearby cathedral began to toll, each mournful chime a hammer blow against my chest, heralding the beginning of a grim day. I clutched the worn leather briefcase in my hand, its cracked edges a testament to years of service in a life I thought I had left behind. It didn't just hold legal documents. It held the fragile honor of my family and the last flickering ember of hope for my son's future. In front of the imposing, columned facade of the courthouse, a small assembly of onlookers had formed. Some were curious neighbors, others were local reporters with cameras poised, sensing a story. Their hushed murmurs drifted towards us like a swarm of restless bees. "It's the Peterson divorce," someone whispered. "Heard it's a nasty one. Poor guy." Each word was a small pinprick to my heart, but I kept my expression a mask of cold resolve, a fortress built over 68 years of life's battles. I would not show them weakness. Just then, a gleaming black limousine pulled up to the curb with an arrogant screech of its tires. The door swung open and Isabella emerged, draped in a defiant crimson dress that screamed victory to the world. Dark, oversized sunglasses hid her eyes, but they couldn't conceal the smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. Her parents and brother followed, their heads held high, striding with the unearned confidence of those who believe they have already won. The sight of them made my stomach churn with a righteous anger. They had no idea what Leo and I had endured to build the life they were now so eager to tear apart. I gently guided Leo forward, my hand on his shoulder, and followed him up the stone steps. My son, once a man who stood tall and strong, now leaned heavily on his crutch, his shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the world's judgment. Every labored step he took was a fresh twist of the knife in my heart. I wanted to scream, to shield him from those condescending gazes, but I could only tighten my grip on the briefcase and walk with a forced, deliberate calm. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick and suffocating, the scent of old wood polish and palpable tension mingling in my nostrils. Isabella was already seated at the defendant's table, her legs crossed, one bright red heel tapping an impatient rhythm on the polished floor. Each tap, tap, tap was a taunt, a countdown to my son's humiliation. When Leo finally made his way to the plaintiff's chair, she offered him a contemptuous smirk and leaned toward her mother, whispering just loud enough for the front rows to hear, "Look at him. He's nothing but a crippled old man." My blood boiled, a hot surge of fury that I had to swallow down, biting the inside of my lip to keep from exploding. Leo simply lowered his head, his chest heaving with a silent, ragged breath, his hands gripping his crutch, as if it were his only anchor in a raging storm. Seeing my son so broken, so utterly defeated, tore my soul apart. This was the boy I had raised, the child for whom I had sacrificed everything, the one who, with tears of joy in his eyes, had promised to build us a home from which no one could ever evict us. And now, here he was, being publicly shamed by the very woman who had once sworn to love and honor him. The dense, charged air of the courtroom seemed to shimmer and fade, pulling me back through the years, back to a time when our small world was still whole. Years ago, when the golden afternoon sun still bathed the quiet suburban streets of our neighborhood, My small family knew a fragile peace. Our house, though humble, was a sanctuary filled with the sound of laughter. I remember those Sunday afternoons so vividly. Leo, then just a boy of 8, would be in the backyard, kicking an old soccer ball against the garage door, narrating his own imaginary World Cup final in a voice full of unbridled joy. I'd watch him from the porch, a book resting in my lap, a serene smile on my face, feeling a contentment so profound I thought it would last forever. But that peace, I would later discover, was merely the calm before a devastating storm. One evening, as the comforting aroma of a pot roast filled the kitchen, my wife Eleanor set down her fork, her gaze as cold and distant as a winter sky. "Arthur," she said, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion, as if she were reading a grocery list. "I'm leaving. I found someone else." I just stood there by the counter, a serving spoon in my hand, the shock hitting me with the force of a physical blow. She didn't even look at me. She simply rose from the table, retrieved a suitcase that was already packed and waiting by the door, and walked out into the night. A sleek, expensive car was idling at the curb, and in the glow of the streetlight, I could just make out the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat, a wealthy developer, I later learned, who had stolen the woman I thought was the love of my life. Leo, who was only 10 at the time, stood frozen in the hallway, his eyes wide with a confusion that shattered my heart, watching his mother's figure disappear into the darkness. The sound of the engine fading into the distance left a silence so absolute, so crushing, it felt like the end of the world. That night, after I had cleared the table and washed the dishes as if it were any other night, I went into Leo's room. He was huddled under his covers, his small shoulders shaking with repressed sobs. I sat on the edge of his bed and drew him into my arms, but I did not cry. I couldn't. I told myself then and there that I had to be a mountain, an unshakable rock for my son to cling to in the storm of our lives. "Dad, why did Mom leave?" he asked, his voice muffled against my chest. I just held him tighter, the words catching in my throat. "I don't know, son," I whispered, my own heart breaking. "But I promise you this. You and I, we will always be together. We'll get through this." I poured every ounce of my soul into that promise. The years that followed were a relentless cycle of duty and love. I was in my late 30s then, a history professor, trying to balance the demands of academia with the all-consuming job of being a single father. Mornings were a whirlwind of making breakfast, packing lunches, and driving Leo to school in our beat-up station wagon. During the day, I would lecture on the rise and fall of empires, my mind often drifting, wondering if he was doing okay. At night, after Leo had finished his homework and was asleep, I would sit at the dining room table, surrounded by stacks of student essays, the glow of my desk lamp, the only light in the quiet house, often working until the first hints of dawn. There were nights when I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me, the loneliness, a physical ache in my chest. But then I would look at Leo's sleeping face, and I knew I couldn't falter. He was my purpose, the reason for my existence. I never told Leo about the nights I spent hunched over my desk, my eyes burning from the dim light, taking on extra research papers and summer teaching sessions just to make ends meet. I never spoke of the quiet anxiety that gnawed at me as I looked at the mounting bills for tuition, for books, for the simple things a growing boy needs. I remember one winter, when he was struck with a severe bout of pneumonia, I had to dip into my meager retirement savings to cover the cost of his medication. Standing at the pharmacy counter, I counted out the bills one by one, my heart sinking with the fear of choosing between my son's health and our ability to pay the rent the next month. But I never gave up. Every time I looked at Leo, at his determination and his unwavering kindness, I told myself that I could not afford to crumble, because he was the entire foundation of my world. The day he received his acceptance letter to study civil engineering at a prestigious university, I was standing in the kitchen making coffee. He handed me the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. I read the letter, and then I read it again, and suddenly my vision blurred. I stood there, leaning against the counter, and wept uncontrollably. It was the first time in years I had allowed myself to cry, with sheer, unadulterated happiness. That joy, however, was quickly tempered by the cold reality of the costs. Silently, without telling him, I sold my most prized possession, a collection of rare, first-edition history books that I had spent a lifetime accumulating. It was the only thing of significant value I owned, a legacy from my own father. I took them to a collector downtown, and watching him appraise each volume, my soul felt like it was being squeezed. "Dad, you didn't have to do that," Leo said when he eventually found out, his eyes red and filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "I can get a job, I cut him off, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Your only job is to study," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. "I want you to build the life I never could. Build something that lasts." Leo embraced me then, and for the first time I felt that he was no longer a child needing my protection, but a man ready to build his own future. And he did not let me down. After years of tireless effort, of late nights studying and summers spent at grueling internships, he built a beautiful 2-story house on a quiet, tree-lined street on the outskirts of Chicago. It was a sturdy, welcoming home, built of brick and oak, with a wide front porch and a big backyard. The day he handed me the keys, his eyes shining with pride, I stood on the freshly cut lawn and cried once more. "Dad, I promised you," Leo said, his own voice choked with emotion. "This is our home. No one can ever kick us out of here." I hugged him, feeling the strength in his arms, the culmination of all the sweat, tears, and love he had poured into every single brick. For the first time in a very long time, I felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling that my sacrifices had not been in vain. When Leo married Isabella, I truly believed our family was finally complete, that the final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. The Isabella I knew back then was a sweet, vibrant young woman with a smile as bright as a field of sunflowers. In those early years, she would join me in the kitchen, her laughter filling the space as she told me about her and Leo's plans for the future. "Dad, I want to have at least 3 kids, she told me once, her eyes sparkling. "I want you to have a whole herd of grandchildren to spoil." I believed her with all my heart. I saw the way Leo's eyes lit up whenever she was near, the way he seemed to walk a little taller, and I would silently thank whatever higher power existed for bringing such a wonderful woman into my son's life. But our idyllic life was shattered by a nightmare from which we would never fully awaken. A sudden electrical surge at the construction site where he was overseeing a project, a catastrophic fall from a high scaffold. I received the call just after midnight. It was Leo's foreman, his voice trembling and broken on the other end of the line. "Mr. Peterson, it's Leo. He's had a terrible accident. You need to get to the hospital now." I ran from the house in a blind panic, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I don't even remember driving, only the blur of streetlights and the desperate prayer repeating over and over in my mind. When I finally arrived, the image that greeted me in the intensive care unit will be forever seared into my memory. Leo, my strong, invincible son, lying motionless in a hospital bed, wrapped in a cocoon of white bandages, machines beeping a somber rhythm beside him. I stayed by his side for days, watching the son who had been the pillar of our family reduced to a figure as fragile as a newborn. "I'm here, Leo," I would whisper, my hand enveloping his. "Daddy's right here with you." The months that followed were a blur of sterile hallways, hushed conversations with doctors, and endless, agonizing days. Leo recovered, but with excruciating slowness, and his legs would never be the same. The doctors delivered the final, devastating verdict. He would have to rely on crutches for the rest of his life. From a man who was always the center of attention, whose laughter could fill a room, Leo retreated into himself, becoming a silent, brooding shadow. He spoke less, his gaze often lost in some distant, painful memory. Every time I saw him struggling to take a few hesitant steps across the yard, leaning heavily on those wooden supports, I felt a piece of my own heart tear away. When Leo finally came home from the hospital, it was as if a permanent cloud had settled over our house. The home my son had built with such pride, once a beacon of our family's resilience and filled with laughter, was now as quiet as a mausoleum. I moved his things into the downstairs study, which we had planned to be a playroom for our future grandchildren. I set up a simple bed for him there, my soul aching with every fold of the sheets. That room, once a symbol of our hopes for the future, was now a makeshift refuge for a man battling the wreckage of his own body. In the first few weeks, Isabella still put on a performance of being a devoted wife. She would bring him bowls of soup, carefully lay out his medication, and even manage a strained smile when I thanked her for her help. I clung to those small gestures, wanting to believe, needing to believe, that she still loved my son, that she was simply struggling to adapt to our new, harsh reality. But with each passing day, I began to see that it was all a carefully constructed facade, and her patience was eroding with a speed that both shocked and terrified me. One early morning, about a month after he'd been home, a sliver of the old Leo reappeared. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the window, and I saw him sitting up in his wheelchair, a rare, hopeful sparkle in his eyes. "Dad, I want to go out to the garden today," he said, his voice laced with an enthusiasm I hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. "I just want to breathe some fresh air. Can you ask Isabella to help me?" I nodded, a wave of relief washing over me. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. I found Isabella in the kitchen, already dressed in stylish workout clothes, scrolling through her phone as she sipped her coffee. "Isabella," I began, keeping my voice gentle, "Leo would like to go into the garden. Could you give him a hand for a moment?" She looked up from her screen, and the annoyance that flashed across her face was like a slap. "Honestly, Arthur, I have a million things to do today," she replied, her tone sharp and cold. "Can't he manage on his own for once?" Before I could even respond, she slammed her coffee mug onto the granite countertop, the sharp crack echoing in the silent kitchen, and stormed out the back door for her morning run, leaving me standing there, speechless and frozen. I returned to the study to find Leo still by the window, but the hopeful light in his eyes had been extinguished. His gaze was fixed on the floor, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair so tightly, his knuckles were white. "It doesn't matter, Dad," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Forget it." I wanted to run after her, to scream in her face, to unleash the torrent of rage building inside me. But looking at my son's defeated posture, I could only swallow my anger and push his chair toward the garden myself, forcing a smile to hide the pain that was breaking me from the inside out. Family meals, which had once been the warmest part of our day, devolved into a silent, agonizing ordeal. I would spend hours cooking the dishes Leo had always loved, hearty stews, chili, his favorite pasta, hoping to coax a little joy back into our lives. But Isabella would sit at the table, picking at her food, a look of profound boredom on her face. She would take a few reluctant bites and then push her plate away, muttering that she had lost her appetite. I vividly remembered how she used to rave about my cooking, how she would laugh and say she wanted me to teach her all my recipes for Leo. Now, she looked at her husband with an open irritation, as if the very act of sharing a table with him was an unbearable sacrifice. "Are you feeling all right, Isabella?" I asked one evening, trying to break the oppressive silence. She just shrugged, not even bothering to look up from her phone. "I'm fine, just not hungry." But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it wasn't the food that stole her appetite. It was my son and the new, inconvenient life he represented. The true, horrifying nature of her intentions was revealed to me one night as I was passing through the hallway to get a glass of water. I heard her voice, a low and calculating murmur, coming from behind the slightly ajar door of the Home Office. She was on the phone, her words sharp and clear in the stillness of the house. "Don't worry," she was saying. "As soon as the house is split in two, we'll have enough capital to start over. He's not going to fight it. He can't." I froze, my hand hovering over the light switch, my heart seizing in my chest as if gripped by an icy fist. The house that Leo had poured his soul into, the sanctuary he had built with his own two hands, the home whose key he had placed in my palm with such pride. It had become nothing more than a line item in her cold, cruel plan. A wave of white-hot fury washed over me, and I had to physically restrain myself from pushing the door open and confronting her then and there. But I held back. An open accusation without irrefutable proof would be useless. I needed to be patient. I needed to protect Leo from this devastating truth, at least for a little while longer. Isabella began to change on the outside too, her physical appearance morphing to match the ugliness growing within her. The comfortable, simple clothes she used to wear were replaced by expensive, tight-fitting dresses that shimmered under the lights. Her lipstick grew brighter, a slash of crimson, and she wore a perfume so strong and cloying that I had to open the windows every time she walked through a room. She started going out frequently at night, offering flimsy excuses about meeting old friends or needing to de-stress. I would watch her leave, the sharp, confident clack, clack, clack of her high heels on the hardwood floor echoing through the silent house, and my heart would sink. I remembered the days when she would hold Leo's hand, her face radiant as they talked about their future together. Now, every time she walked out that door, I felt she wasn't just leaving Leo behind for a few hours, but was also abandoning the vows and promises that had once made me trust her so completely. The whispers from the neighborhood soon started to reach me. One afternoon, while I was picking up groceries at the local market, Mrs. Gable, the kind woman who runs the produce stand, pulled me aside. She looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting around. "Arthur, I don't mean to gossip," she whispered, her voice low, "but I've been seeing your daughter-in-law quite a bit lately. At that fancy new coffee shop downtown. With a man, they seem very close, laughing and touching, like a couple." I managed a tight, forced smile and thanked her for her concern. But inside, the suspicion I had been harboring had just solidified into a cold, hard certainty. I didn't want to believe it, but all the pieces were clicking into place. Isabella was no longer the girl I had welcomed into our family as a daughter. She had become a stranger, a conspirator with a plan I was only beginning to understand. The final, unforgivable blow came late one night, when Leo was suffering from a particularly bad bout of nerve pain. I heard him groan from his room, his voice weak and strained. "Isabella, honey, can you help me? Just for a minute. My leg is killing me. Could you massage it a little?" I stood in the hallway, my heart aching for him, hoping for even a small gesture of tenderness from my daughter-in-law. Instead, I heard the sharp sound of her pulling her hand away. Her voice, when she spoke, was as sharp and cruel as a shard of glass. "I am not your nurse, Leo," she spat. "If you need constant care, then you should hire someone to look after you." I stood there, my hand clenched on the doorframe, feeling as if a dagger had just been plunged into my chest. Leo fell silent. He didn't argue, didn't protest, but I knew those words had wounded him more deeply than his fall ever could. The house, which once overflowed with laughter and hope, now sank into a thick, suffocating silence, haunted by unspoken pain and betrayal. One grey Tuesday afternoon, with a sky the colour of slate threatening rain, I had just placed a pitcher of iced tea on the kitchen table when I heard the front door open. It was the sharp, unfamiliar click of 2 sets of heels on the hardwood floor that put me on immediate alert. Isabella entered, but she was not alone. Beside her was a woman I didn't recognize, dressed in an impeccably tailored black pantsuit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. She walked with an air of cold, calculated power that seemed to suck the warmth right out of the room. Isabella, wearing a severe navy blue dress, didn't even glance at me or at Leo, who was sitting at the table trying to read the newspaper. The atmosphere in our home, already strained, instantly became as tense and thin as a wire stretched to its breaking point. Isabella slid a thick stack of papers across the polished wood surface towards my son. Her voice, when she spoke, was as dry and brittle as dead leaves. "Sign these," she commanded, not asked. "We're getting a divorce. By law, this house gets split down the middle." Those words landed with the force of a physical blow. I looked at Leo, and the color drained from his face, leaving it a waxy, bloodless white. His hands, resting on the newspaper, began to tremble uncontrollably as he stared at the documents, at the clinical black-and-white finality of it all. I set the glass I was holding down on the table with a steady hand, my movements deliberate, as I fought to contain the inferno of rage igniting in my chest. "On what grounds?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Do you claim this house is common property?" Isabella lifted her chin, a look of such brazen entitlement on her face it made me want to leap across the table. "We're married, Arthur. It's the law. All assets acquired during the marriage are divided 50-50. Or are you too old to understand how things work?" Her words were a calculated insult, a slap in the face not just to me, but to the years of blood and sweat Leo had poured into making this house a home. I took a slow, deep breath, anchoring myself. "You are mistaken, Isabella," I replied, my voice firm and clear. "This house is Leo's sole and separate property. It was purchased and titled in his name a full 2 years before you were married. Legally, you have no right to it." And the room fell into a sudden, shocked silence. Leo lifted his head, and for the first time since she had walked in, a tiny, fragile glimmer of hope flickered in his desperate eyes. The lawyer, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, her voice as sharp as her suit's tailoring. "Mr. Peterson," she interjected, "while that may be true under this state's marriage laws, there are provisions that can allow separate property to be reclassified as marital property after a significant period of cohabitation, especially when it has served as the primary family residence. You should be careful with your assertions." I looked her straight in the eye, unintimidated. "And you should be careful who you threaten," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steely tone. I know the law, but Isabella would not be deterred. She shot up from her chair, her composure finally cracking, her voice rising to a shrill, ugly shriek. "I don't care about the law," she screamed, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I just want to be rid of this burden. He's an invalid, a cripple. I still have a life to live." Her words rained down on my son like hammer blows. He sat there, utterly still, his shoulders trembling, his voice a broken whisper. "Isabella, do you really see me that way?" She refused to meet his gaze, turning her head away with a flick of her hair. Her silence was more cruel, more damning than any word she could have spoken. I felt my own heart being ripped from my chest. My son, Leo, the pride and joy of my entire existence, was being called a burden by the woman he had loved, the woman for whom he had built this very house. The lawyer quickly ushered a seething Isabella out the door, leaving the divorce petition on the table like an unerasable scar. The slam of the front door echoed through the house, leaving Leo and me in a silence that was heavier and more profound than any I had ever known. I began to clear the table, my hands moving automatically, needing to do something, anything, to keep from facing the raw pain that was crushing my chest. But my hands were shaking so violently that a glass slipped from my grasp and shattered on the tile floor, the sound a mournful echo of my own breaking heart. Leo was still sitting motionless, his empty gaze fixed on the divorce papers. "Dad," he murmured, his voice weak and raspy. "What did I do? What did I do to make her change like this?" I didn't answer right away. I just knelt to pick up the broken pieces of glass, then sat down beside him and put my hand on his shoulder. "You did nothing wrong, son," I said, my own voice choked with unshed tears. "She is the one who is wrong, not you." That night, sleep was an impossibility. The air in the house felt thick, heavy with betrayal, and I tossed and turned for hours. The faint moonlight that filtered through the window cast long, skeletal shadows on the ceiling, each one seeming to mock our family's collapse. I thought of Leo, of all the years we had struggled together, of the promise I had made to him as a boy to always protect him from harm. And now the person who was inflicting the most grievous wound was the one he had chosen to love. Finally, Overwhelmed by a thirst I couldn't quench, I got up and walked quietly toward the kitchen. As I passed the guest room, where Isabella and our 8-year-old granddaughter Lily were now staying, I heard a hushed murmur from within. I stopped, my hand on the wall, and listened. It was Isabella's voice, cold and sharp, slicing through the wooden door like a razor. "Lily, you listen to me very carefully," she hissed. "Tomorrow in court, when the judge asks you, you must say that your daddy can't take care of you anymore. You have to say that you don't want to live with a sick person. Do you understand me?" The words hit me with the force of a physical punch. I stood there in the dark hallway, my body rigid, my hand gripping the glass of water so tightly I was surprised it didn't shatter. Then I heard Lily's voice, small and trembling with sobs. But I don't want to lie, Mommy," she wept. "I love Daddy. I love him so much." Her innocent words were a dagger in my already wounded heart. Isabella's response came back instantly, devoid of any patience or maternal warmth. "If you don't do exactly as I say, you and I will lose everything. Do you want to live a miserable life with your poor old grandpa and your invalid father?" I stood there in the darkness, my heart tight in my chest, feeling as if someone was slowly crushing the very life out of me. The woman I had once welcomed as a daughter was now poisoning her own child, forcing our sweet, innocent Lily to betray her own father. In that moment, a cold, hard rage consumed me, burning away the sorrow and helplessness. This was no longer just a divorce. It was a battle for my granddaughter's soul, and I knew with absolute certainty that I could not and would not let Isabella win. After the night, I overheard Isabella's monstrous instructions to Lily. My heart burned with a cold, clear fire. The pain and sorrow had been forged into something harder, something sharper: determination. I could not allow my granddaughter to be twisted into a weapon in her mother's cruel war. But I knew that emotional pleas and angry confrontations would be useless against a woman like Isabella. I needed facts. I needed evidence as hard and undeniable as steel. I needed the truth, sharp enough to shatter the armor of lies she had so carefully constructed around herself. And so, I made the decision to reach out to an old friend from a life I had largely left behind. Frank Miller was a retired police detective who now ran a small private investigation agency. We had known each other for 30 years, our friendship forged through a shared love of history and a mutual respect for the unvarnished truth. His office was tucked away in a nondescript building in a quieter part of Chicago, smelling faintly of stale coffee and old case files. The room was cluttered but organized, lit by the yellow glow of a single desk lamp that cast long shadows across stacks of folders and black and white photographs pinned to a corkboard. When I pushed the door open, Frank was sitting behind his metal desk, a half-empty mug in his hand. He looked up, and a slow smile of surprise spread across his tired face. "Arthur," he said, his voice a low rumble. "My God, it's been too long. I thought you'd be happily retired, buried in dusty old books." I managed a thin, cold smile as I sat in the worn leather chair across from him. "I was, Frank," I said, the ache in my voice palpable. "But my past has a way of catching up." I told him everything. I laid out the whole ugly story in stark, simple terms. Leo's accident, the chilling transformation in Isabella, the divorce lawsuit, and the final, unforgivable plan to force our sweet Lily to lie on the witness stand. Frank listened in complete silence, his sharp detective's eyes never leaving my face. He nodded slowly, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his creaking chair, the sound filling the quiet room. "I understand," he said, his tone low and serious. "Leave it with me. But you need to be prepared, Arthur. In cases like this, the truth is often a hell of a lot uglier than you suspect." I clenched my hands in my lap, my knuckles white. "I'm prepared for anything, Frank," I said, my voice steady. "I just need the truth, no matter how painful it is." The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, I found Lily in the backyard, sitting on the dew-dampened swing set. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she was clutching the little teddy bear Leo had won for her at a carnival years ago. I sat on the swing next to her and gently pushed off, the chains groaning softly. "Honey," I started, my voice soft, I heard the conversation between you and your mom last night. You must be very scared, aren't you?" She looked at me, her lower lip trembling, and then she burst into tears, throwing her arms around my waist and burying her face in my shirt. "Grandpa, I don't want to do it," she sobbed, her small body shaking. "I don't want to leave Daddy. I don't want to lie." Her cries broke what was left of my heart. I held her tight, my own tears falling silently onto her hair. "You don't have to be afraid, Lily," I whispered, my voice firm despite the emotion choking me. "Your grandpa is here. You will not have to lie to anyone. The truth is our most powerful weapon. You must always remember that." She looked up at me, her clear blue eyes, so much like her father's, searching my face. "But Mommy said," she began, her voice filled with fear. I gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Your mommy is wrong," I said with absolute certainty. "No one is going to take you away from your daddy or from me, I promise you." A few days later, Frank called and asked to meet me at a small, out-of-the-way diner on the south side. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a secluded booth with a folder resting on the table in front of him. He pushed it towards me without a word. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. The photographs inside were crystal clear, professionally taken. There was Isabella, laughing, draped on the arm of a handsome, powerfully built man in an expensive suit. They were coming out of a five-star hotel on the Gold Coast. Isabella smiling with a genuine, carefree radiance I hadn't seen on her face in years. I picked up one of the photos with a trembling hand, the glossy paper feeling cold and alien beneath my fingertips. "His name is Marcus Thorne," Frank murmured, his voice grim. "A real estate mogul with a reputation. He's known for romancing women with assets, helping them through messy divorces, and then taking a significant cut." My heart filled with a sickening combination of pain and rage. While my son was at home, fighting through excruciating pain just to learn to walk again, the wife he adored was being squired around town by another man, actively plotting to steal the very home Leo had built for their family. "How far has it gone?" I asked, my voice a broken rasp. Frank sighed, shaking his head. "It's serious, Arthur. I found hotel receipts, airline tickets for weekend getaways, even records of substantial bank transfers from Thorne's business account to her personal one. This isn't a fling. It's a business transaction. I paid Frank, asking him to keep digging, to find every last piece of evidence he could. That night, I hid the envelope in a locked drawer in my study. I couldn't let Leo see it. He had already endured more than any man should have to bear. I would not be the one to deliver the final, crushing blow that his wife's love had not just died, but had been a monstrous betrayal from the start. The morning of the first hearing, a cold drizzle was falling from the sky. I helped Leo from the car, his face pale and drawn. He tried to give me a weak smile. "I'm okay, Dad," he said, but his voice trembled. Across the street, Isabella and her family arrived, laughing and talking as if they were attending a premiere. Inside the courtroom, Miss Crane, Isabella's lawyer, stood up, her voice echoing in the silent room. "Your Honor," she began, "my client, Mrs. Isabella Peterson, has been forced to endure an untenable home life. Mr. Peterson, due to his unfortunate disability, is no longer capable of fulfilling his role as a husband or a father. He is unable to work, unable to provide. We are requesting a divorce and an equitable division of assets, including the family home." Every word was a lie, a distortion of the truth that made my blood run cold. Isabella then added her own venom. "He's a burden, Your Honor," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I deserve a chance at a normal life, not to be a full-time caretaker for a man who can't even stand on his own." The words hit Leo like a physical assault. He struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his crutches, his face flushed with a mixture of shame and anger. I can still take care of my daughter," he stammered, his voice cracking. I am still Lily's father. But the words caught in his throat, and he sank back into his chair, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Isabella let out a short, sharp, sarcastic laugh. "Look at yourself, Leo," she said, her voice filled with contempt. "You can't even speak for yourself. Who do you think you're fooling?" In that instant, watching my son's spirit crumble, I knew I could not wait any longer. I stood up. I walked calmly to the plaintiff's table. I placed my old leather briefcase on the wooden surface with a solid, definitive thud. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and firm, resonating through the stunned courtroom. "From this moment forward, I will be speaking for my son." On the morning of the next hearing, the atmosphere in the courthouse was electric. The room was packed to the rafters, a standing room, only crowd of reporters, with pens poised, curious neighbors, and strangers drawn in by the whispers that had spread like wildfire through the city, the story of the old professor who had stood up in court to defend his broken son. I walked in with Leo on one side and Lily holding my other hand, her small fingers clutching mine as if I were her only anchor in a turbulent sea. Leo's steps were still labored, but he held his head a little higher, and in his tired eyes I saw a flicker of the fight I thought had been extinguished forever. Isabella was already at the defendant's table, dressed in a severe, expensive-looking grey suit, a stark contrast to her previous flamboyant attire. The triumphant smile was gone, replaced by a tight, nervous line. Beside her, Miss Crane, her lawyer, clutched a stack of documents, her knuckles white, a soldier preparing for a battle she now knew she might lose. Judge Harrison entered with his usual solemnity, and the room fell into a deep, expectant silence. He gestured for me to begin. I stood up, walked to the table, and opened my old leather briefcase. I didn't begin with emotion or accusations. I began with facts. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady, resonating with the quiet authority of a lifetime spent in lecture halls. "I present as the first piece of evidence the official property documents for the house located at 212 Oak Street. All records, from the initial purchase agreement to the final deed, clearly indicate that this property was bought by and is titled solely in the name of my son, Mr. Leo Peterson, on May 12, 2015. This date, as the court will note, is 2 full years and 3 months prior to his marriage to Mrs. Isabella Peterson." I placed the documents on the table one by one, each page landing with a soft, definitive rustle, like laying the foundation stones of a fortress of truth. The court clerk reviewed them and nodded to the judge, confirming their authenticity. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. I saw Isabella's parents, sitting in the front row, exchange a panicked look. Miss Crane immediately jumped to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. While the initial purchase may have been separate, the house became the primary family residence, and as such—" I cut her off, my voice sharp and unyielding. "Mrs. Rivers, the law is unequivocally clear on this point. A primary residence status does not magically alter the fundamental right of ownership over a property acquired and paid for before the marriage began. This house is, and has always been, the untouchable asset of my son." Before she could formulate another response, I moved to my next point. "Your Honor," I continued, pulling a small digital audio recorder from my briefcase, "I would now like to present a recording made on the evening of October 5th, the night before our first hearing." I handed the device to the clerk. As the recording began to play, the courtroom became so silent you could hear a pin drop. First, Isabella's voice, cold, harsh, and cruel, filled the room. "Lily, listen carefully. Tomorrow in court, if the judge asks, you have to say that your daddy can't take care of you anymore. You have to say you don't want to live with a sick person. Understand?" Then the sound of Lily's heartbreaking sobs. "But I don't want to lie, Mommy. I love Daddy very much." And finally, Isabella's voice, laced with merciless venom. "If you don't do as I say, we'll lose everything. Do you want to live miserably with your poor old grandpa and your invalid father?" A collective gasp swept through the room. All eyes filled with a mixture of astonishment and revulsion were fixed on Isabella. She leaped from her seat, her face a mask of fury and panic. "That's a lie! It's fake! He fabricated it to defame me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. But Judge Harrison raised a hand, his expression grim. "Order in the court," he commanded, his voice like thunder. "I want to hear from the witness directly. Call the child, Lily Peterson, to the stand." Lily walked forward, her small steps hesitant but determined. Seeing my granddaughter, so small and fragile in that enormous witness box, nearly broke me. Isabella leaned forward, her voice suddenly syrupy sweet but dripping with pressure. "Lily, sweetie, tell everyone you want to be with me, right? Tell them what we talked about." The entire room held its breath. Lily looked at her mother, then turned her tear-filled eyes directly to Judge Harrison, and with a voice that trembled but did not break, she spoke the simple, powerful truth. "I love my daddy," she said clearly. "I'm not going to lie. I want to be with my daddy and my grandpa." The room exploded, not in loud shouts, but in a wave of murmurs and a few instances of spontaneous, muffled applause from strangers in the back. Leo finally broke, burying his face in his hands as great, shuddering sobs of relief and love shook his entire body. I placed a hand on his shoulder, my own eyes blurred with tears. Isabella turned ghostly pale, screaming in desperation. "She's been manipulated. That old man brainwashed her." But her shrill accusations found no purchase. The truth, spoken from the mouth of a child, had a power that no lie could overcome. Just as the judge was calling for order, Isabella, in a final, desperate act of spite, pointed a trembling finger at me, her eyes wild with hate. "And who are you to lecture anyone on family?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "Don't believe a word he says. He's nothing but a failed husband whose own wife abandoned him. He couldn't even keep his own family together. Who can trust someone like that?" Her words hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at my heart. The room stirred, the reporters scribbling furiously. I saw Leo look at me, a flash of fear in his eyes, worried that this final, personal attack would undo everything. Sarah squeezed my hand, her small face etched with worry. I took a deep breath, ready to face this final ghost from my past. But before I could speak, Judge Harrison leaned forward, his gaze fixed on me. He gently tapped his gavel, and his voice cut through the tension with a surprising warmth and an unshakable authority. "I believe I can attest to Mr. Peterson's character," he said, his voice grave and firm, capturing the attention of every person in the room. "Many years ago, when I was a young, struggling law student, I had the privilege of being in Professor Arthur Peterson's senior ethics seminar at the university. The most important lesson he ever taught us was that a person's integrity, their commitment to the truth, is the only currency that truly matters in this world. I can say, without any reservation, that he is one of the most honorable men I have ever had the honor of knowing." The judge's words swept through the courtroom like a cleansing wind, followed by a wave of stunned, admiring murmurs. I looked at Isabella. She seemed to physically deflate, staggering back into her chair as if her bones had turned to dust. Her final weapon had not only failed to hit its mark, but had spectacularly backfired, cementing my honor in front of the entire world. On the morning of the next hearing, the atmosphere in the courthouse was electric. The room was packed to the rafters, a standing-room-only crowd of reporters, with pens poised, curious neighbors, and strangers drawn in by the whispers that had spread like wildfire through the city, the story of the old professor who had stood up in court to defend his broken son. I walked in with Leo on one side and Lily holding my other hand, her small fingers clutching mine as if I were her only anchor in a turbulent sea. Leo's steps were still labored, but he held his head a little higher, and in his tired eyes I saw a flicker of the fight I thought had been extinguished forever. Isabella was already at the defendant's table, dressed in a severe, expensive-looking grey suit, a stark contrast to her previous flamboyant attire. The triumphant smile was gone, replaced by a tight, nervous line. Beside her, Miss Crane, her lawyer, clutched a stack of documents, her knuckles white, a soldier preparing for a battle she now knew she might lose. Judge Harrison entered with his usual solemnity, and the room fell into a deep, expectant silence. He gestured for me to begin. I stood up, walked to the table, and opened my old leather briefcase. I didn't begin with emotion or accusations. I began with facts. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady, resonating with the quiet authority of a lifetime spent in lecture halls. "I present as the first piece of evidence the official property documents for the house located at 212 Oak Street. All records, from the initial purchase agreement to the final deed, clearly indicate that this property was bought by and is titled solely in the name of my son, Mr. Leo Peterson, on May 12, 2015. This date, as the court will note, is 2 full years and 3 months prior to his marriage to Mrs. Isabella Peterson. I placed the documents on the table one by one, each page landing with a soft, definitive rustle, like laying the foundation stones of a fortress of truth. The court clerk reviewed them and nodded to the judge, confirming their authenticity. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. I saw Isabella's parents, sitting in the front row, exchange a panicked look. Miss Crane immediately jumped to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. While the initial purchase may have been separate, the house became the primary family residence, and as such—" I cut her off, my voice sharp and unyielding. "Mrs. Rivers, the law is unequivocally clear on this point. A primary residence status does not magically alter the fundamental right of ownership over a property acquired and paid for before the marriage began. This house is, and has always been, the untouchable asset of my son." Before she could formulate another response, I moved to my next point. "Your Honor," I continued, pulling a small digital audio recorder from my briefcase, "I would now like to present a recording made on the evening of October 5th, the night before our first hearing." I handed the device to the clerk. As the recording began to play, the courtroom became so silent you could hear a pin drop. First, Isabella's voice, cold, harsh, and cruel, filled the room. "Lily, listen carefully. Tomorrow in court, if the judge asks, you have to say that your daddy can't take care of you anymore. You have to say you don't want to live with a sick person. Understand?" Then, the sound of Lily's heartbreaking sobs. "But I don't want to lie, Mommy. I love Daddy very much." And finally, Isabella's voice, laced with merciless venom. "If you don't do as I say, we'll lose everything. Do you want to live miserably with your poor old grandpa and your invalid father?" A collective gasp swept through the room. All eyes, filled with a mixture of astonishment and revulsion, were fixed on Isabella. She leaped from her seat, her face a mask of fury and panic. "That's a lie! It's fake! He fabricated it to defame me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. But Judge Harrison raised a hand, his expression grim. "Order in the court," he commanded, his voice like thunder. "I want to hear from the witness directly. Call the child, Lily Peterson, to the stand." Lily walked forward, her small steps hesitant but determined. Seeing my granddaughter, so small and fragile in that enormous witness box, nearly broke me. Isabella leaned forward, her voice suddenly syrupy, sweet, but dripping with pressure. "Lily, sweetie, tell everyone you want to be with me, right? Tell them what we talked about." The entire room held its breath. Lily looked at her mother, then turned her tear-filled eyes directly to Judge Harrison, and with a voice that trembled but did not break, she spoke the simple, powerful truth. "I love my daddy," she said clearly. "I am not going to lie. I want to be with my daddy and my grandpa." The room exploded, not in loud shouts, but in a wave of murmurs and a few instances of spontaneous, muffled applause from strangers in the back. Leo finally broke, burying his face in his hands as great, shuddering sobs of relief and love shook his entire body. I placed a hand on his shoulder, my own eyes blurred with tears. Isabella turned ghostly pale, screaming in desperation, "She's been manipulated. That old man brainwashed her." but her shrill accusations found no purchase. The truth, spoken from the mouth of a child, had a power that no lie could overcome. Just as the judge was calling for order, Isabella, in a final desperate act of spite, pointed a trembling finger at me, her eyes wild with hate. "And who are you to lecture anyone on family?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "Don't believe a word he says. He's nothing but a failed husband whose own wife abandoned him. He couldn't even keep his own family together. Who can trust someone like that?" Her words hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at my heart. The room stirred, the reporters scribbling furiously. I saw Leo look at me, a flash of fear in his eyes, worried that this final personal attack would undo everything. Sarah squeezed my hand, her small face etched with worry. I took a deep breath, ready to face this final ghost from my past. But before I could speak, Judge Harrison leaned forward, his gaze fixed on me. He gently tapped his gavel, and his voice cut through the tension with a surprising warmth and an unshakable authority. "I believe I can attest to Mr. Peterson's character," he said, his voice grave and firm, capturing the attention of every person in the room. "Many years ago, when I was a young, struggling law student, I had the privilege of being in Professor Arthur Peterson's senior ethics seminar at the university. The most important lesson he ever taught us was that a person's integrity, their commitment to the truth, is the only currency that truly matters in this world. I can say, without any reservation, that he is one of the most honorable men I have ever had the honor of knowing." The judge's words swept through the courtroom like a cleansing wind, followed by a wave of stunned, admiring murmurs. I looked at Isabella. She seemed to physically deflate, staggering back into her chair as if her bones had turned to dust. Her final weapon had not only failed to hit its mark, but had spectacularly backfired, cementing my honor in front of the entire world. On the day the final verdict was to be delivered, the courtroom was so packed it felt as if the entire city was holding its breath with us. I stood with Leo and Lily, our hands joined, a small, unbroken triangle of hope against the world. Judge Harrison entered, and a profound silence fell. He cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the room before settling on our family. "After a thorough review of all evidence and testimony," he announced, his voice echoing with the weight of fate, "this court delivers the following verdict. The divorce is granted. Full and sole ownership of the family home remains with Mr. Leo Peterson. Full physical and legal custody of the minor child, Lily Peterson, is awarded to her father, Leo Peterson, and her grandfather, Mr. Arthur Peterson. Mrs. Isabella Peterson will receive no financial benefits and will be granted limited, supervised visitation rights only." The room erupted in a wave of relieved whispers and quiet applause. Leo collapsed against me, the tension of months of agony finally releasing in a flood of cathartic, healing tears. Sarah ran into our arms, and I held them both, my two most precious people, feeling a peace so deep it settled into my very bones. Across the room, Isabella jumped to her feet, her face twisted in a mask of disbelief and rage, screaming that it wasn't fair, that she would appeal. But her shrill cries were ignored, lost in the quiet dignity of the truth that had finally prevailed. A few days later we heard that Marcus Thorne, the man she had gambled her family for, had cut all ties with her the moment he learned she had lost the case. She was left with nothing but the consequences of her own choices. For us, our new life began. I watched with pride as Leo slowly regained his strength, his spirit rekindled by Lily's unwavering love. Our house, once a place of silent suffering, was filled once more with the sounds of laughter. One sunny afternoon, I saw Lily in my study, standing on a stool in one of my old professor's jackets, lecturing her teddy bears on the importance of telling the truth. Leo, watching from the doorway, caught my eye and smiled a real, genuine smile, the first I had seen in what felt like an eternity. "After everything we have endured, I've come to understand that life can strip many things away from us, our health, our trust, the people we love. But there are two things that no one can ever take: our integrity, and the love we have for our family. They are the twin anchors that hold us steady in the fiercest storms. In life, you will face moments that test you to the very limits of your strength. But I want you to know that if you hold fast to the truth and refuse to bow to deceit, justice, in some form, will eventually find its voice. And above all, remember that the love of family is the greatest, most powerful force on this earth. It is the light that can guide you out of the deepest darkness. Thank you for listening to my family's story. If it has touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. May you always have the courage to fight for what is right, and may your days be filled with peace,